The horror genre is one that is forever keeping its audiences on their toes. This is especially true for the opening. Here, a surprise is welcome, and that surprise may be down to a curveball being thrown at the audience, it could be down to just how brutal any given opening act is, or it could be down to how downright random that first sequence is as well. But a good horror movie opening always finds a way to disarm the audience. I'm Josh from What Culture Horror, and these are 10 slasher horror movie openings that surprised us all. Number 10, The Mutilator. Buddy Cooper and John S. Douglas's The Mutilator opens in such cheery fashion. Here we have an unnamed woman happily baking a cake for the birthday of her husband, Big Ed. The couple's young son, Little Ed, is there, gleefully going about his business and waiting for the arrival of his old man so that the birthday celebrations can begin. Just as you get comfortable with this setting though, this 1985 effort flips a switch, or I guess pulls a trigger technically, and turns this idyllic scene into one of tragedy. Having cleaned his father's guns, Ed accidentally unloads one, sending a bullet through the wall and into his dear mother, killing her in the process just as Big Ed turns up at the house. This in itself is a grim moment, but things take a darker turn when Big Ed slaps the absolute crap out of his son, debates shooting him, and then has a total breakdown, pours a bourbon for himself and his wife's corpse. Given this stark opening scene then, it's no surprise to see it later revealed that Big Ed winds up stalking his now adult Ed and his pals. Number 9, The Stepfather. 1987's The Stepfather often gets overlooked when thinking of some of the better offerings the slasher subgenre has served up over the years. Now, it may not be quite a top-tier effort to rank alongside the all-time greats, but The Stepfather is a solid film that has an absolutely phenomenal opening sequence. Starting off by introducing us to Henry Morrison, played by Terry O'Quinn of Lost fame, we find Henry in his bathroom, shaving off his beard, cutting his hair, changing his eye colour, showering, putting on a nice suit, picking up his briefcase, and then finally heading downstairs. Sure, it is a tad odd to see such a dramatic transformation from a scruffy mess to a pristine businessman, but hey, maybe Henry has had a rough day or two. We've all been there, I suppose. Well, that's not entirely true, because instead of Henry just having had a bad time, we soon come to realize that it's actually his family who've had it the worst, as the stepfather follows O'Quinn's character downstairs to reveal blood-splattered walls and his family all dead. Thinking nothing of this, Henry leaves the house, collects the mail, then whistles off into the distance to start a new life. Joseph Ruben's '87 movie brutally sets its stall out in those opening minutes, with Henry soon becoming a real estate agent known as Jerry Blake, who has his own new family to terrorize. Number 8, You're Next. In Adam Wingard's You're Next, we have a movie that completely pulls the rug out from under you from the get-go. Ahead of the movie's release, the promotional material had geared audiences up to expect a small group of animal mask-wearing killers on a bloody rampage. And yes, that is indeed technically what we ultimately got, well, at least until the tables were turned on said killers, but the opening moments of You're Next led you to believe that Talia and Eric were going to be some of our central protagonists. And while they were very much on the protagonist's side of the fence, the pair's role in You're Next was an extremely minimal one. Rather than sticking around for a good chunk of the movie, lovebirds Talia and Eric were merely fodder whose sole purpose was to get murdered during the film's first few minutes as a way to set up the threat that was looming large for the Davison family down the road. With the benefit of hindsight, of course, Talia and Eric's roles here made perfect sense. Given the clever, minimal marketing campaign around You're Next though, seeing these characters not be more pivotal characters was somewhat of a shocker during a first watch at the time of the movie's 2013 release. Number 7, The Collection. When you watch the opening of The Collection, it's no surprise to hear that the concept for this property actually began life as a Saw prequel. And while the two movies to date very much have elements of the Saw franchise in them, The Collector and The Collection also have plentiful slasher tropes running throughout them. Getting this off to a shocking, bloody start, the opening of 2012's The Collection becomes an absolute bloodbath as it picks up the action mere weeks after the torturous, twisted events of the previous movie. As shiny new protagonist Elena heads to a party with her pals, it's here that the Collector makes his eerie first move of this follow-up effort. With Elena having caught her boyfriend with another girl, she punches the prick in the face and storms off to a random room. In said room, we find a strange box which is revealed to contain the first film's Archon, and this sets in motion a scene of utter carnage. Swanky 2012 CGI shows a contraption get to work in unleashing huge razor blades across the dance floor, splicing partygoers and the DJ all in half. For those lucky enough to survive that assault, there's then a machete trap awaiting them. Number 6, Last Girl Standing. Going into Last Girl Standing cold, you might just presume that the picture was your regular old slasher movie based around some young woman being forever pursued by a nefarious presence. And while that is technically correct, the difference here is that the torment suffered by the character of Cameron is mostly the mental fallout of having already dealt with your standard masked killer. Rather than follow the usual slasher tropes, Benjamin R. Moody's film surprisingly gets all of the action out of the way during Last Girl Standing's opening scene. There, we're thrown straight into things as Cameron finds herself fighting for her life against a mysterious killer who has already slaughtered all of her friends. Managing to escape this most harrowing of experiences, the more surprising element of Last Girl Standing is that the traditional slasher element is done and dusted in those first 5 minutes. From there, the picture jumps forward to shine a spotlight on how one deals with surviving such an ordeal. We find a Cameron who lives a soulless life of isolation that sees her float from her apartment to her mundane job at the local laundromat, with every dark shadow, every stranger, every noise a stark reminder of what she'd been through, as Last Girl Standing becomes a character study of sorts. Number 5, When a Stranger Calls, 1979. 1979's When a Stranger Calls is a movie that has a surprising opening sequence and entire first act for several different reasons. Now, just keep in mind that this is the movie that first popularized the whole "the calls are coming from inside the house" trope that would become a staple of the horror genre in the years following this Fred Walton film. As such, that opening act reveal itself is already a major shocker. More shocking and downright disturbing about When a Stranger Calls' opening mind is the fact that the man menacing babysitter Jill Johnson doesn't just eerily taunt her to check on the children that she's looking after. No, this creep has outright actually killed the kids just for a laugh. Another way that When a Stranger Calls is somewhat surprising to some is that this is a horror movie that isn't what you really think it is. If you've merely heard about it or are going into it cold, chances are you'll think that the chilling stalking of Jill Johnson is the entire movie. Instead, that calls from inside the house fable only makes up the opening act before the film jumps ahead 7 years. That said, the When a Stranger Calls remake of 2006 does stretch that opening act babysitter sequence out and make it the sole narrative of the do-over's 87-minute runtime. Number 4, Santa's Slayer. While these days we have Dwayne Johnson, Dave Bautista and John Cena showing that wrestlers can make for damn fine actors, there was a period of time where any movie featuring a pro wrestler would be absolute trash. Well, unless that wrestler's name was Roddy Piper, of course. One such trash offering was 2005's Santa's Slayer, which featured WCW icon Bill Goldberg in the headline role as a brutal, blood-spilling Santa Claus who is also the Antichrist. In this David Steinman offering, Goldberg's Kris Kringle is the result of a virgin birth orchestrated by Satan himself. Initially using Christmas Day as a day of slaying, that all changed when Santa lost a curling match in 1005 AD. That meant he had to spend the next 1000 years delivering presents on that day as a punishment. Yeah, it's a bit mad. As Santa's Slayer opens, those 1000 years just so happen to have expired. And how does old Saint Nick mark his newfound freedom? Well, he slaughters the Mason family in brilliantly imaginative, festive ways. What makes this moment particularly surprising is how it kills off all of the billed main stars of the picture in that opening act, as James Caan, Fran Drescher, Rebecca Gayheart, Chris Kattan, Alice Lauren, and Annie Sorrell are all off during Santa's Slayer's opening scene. Number 3, A Black Christmas, 2006. Bob Clark's Black Christmas is one of the true forefathers of the slasher subgenre, with this 1974 offering viewed by many horror hounds as being the inaugural slasher film. By the time Black Christmas was first remade in 2006, though, the general consensus was a puzzled reaction questioning why such a classic tale needed retelling in the first place. And truth be told, it didn't really, but still, that didn't stop Glenn Morgan's 06 redo from landing in US cinemas on Christmas Day of that year. One element where the Black Christmas remake clearly trumps its predecessor, though, is in the sheer amount of gory, grisly kills that the film serves up, all often with some sort of creepy eye mutilation involved. Granted, seeing Claire killed by having a plastic bag thrown over her head isn't all that gruesome in the opening, but that demise is then instantly followed by Jessica Harmon's Megan, and it's here that the 2006 Black Christmas sets its stall out. With plastic thrown over her, Megan is stabbed in the eye repeatedly before then having her eyes pulled straight out of her head, all in graphic detail, all to make you feel queasy. Number 2, Scream. Now, of course, we talk about Scream all of the time on this channel, but it just wouldn't make sense to leave it off here, as it's impossible to ignore those opening moments of Craven's 1996 picture and what it means to deliver a surprising, effectual slasher horror movie opening. The actual act of Casey's death was, of course, a chilling one, with her being played like a fiddle in a terrifying game of cat and mouse before being carved up and then hanged from a tree. But the most jarring part of this sequence is that it's Drew Barrymore's character who fell afoul of Ghostface in the opening. Barrymore, of course, had been front and center of the promotional push for Scream, with Dimension Films' marketing campaign being so heavily built around Drew as Scream's A-list star. So, not only did this serve as a genuine shock at the time of its release, but the death of Casey Becker also firmly cemented that all bets were off with this franchise, a theme that would be followed throughout the film and the subsequent entries that followed. Number 1, Halloween 1978. Just like Scream, it would be impossible to compile such a list and then not feature the iconic opening to John Carpenter's legendary Halloween in some form or fashion. Along with Black Christmas, Halloween is the film often credited with kickstarting the slasher subgenre as we know it. And man, did Halloween itself kick things off with an almighty opening. Even though everybody knows it now, at the time, absolutely nobody was ready for Halloween's opening act reveal that the person we'd just seen carry out bloody murder was actually an angelic-faced 6-year-old boy. With the opening act death of Judith Myers, the audience had seen all of this play out from the killer's POV, which in reality, by the way, was actually writer-producer Deborah Hill's hands carrying out the stabby-stabby action. It's only once this killer leaves Judith's lifeless body behind and heads outside that we have the jaw-dropping revelation that the carnage we've just witnessed was carried out by someone so young. It was genuinely shocking, it was utterly jarring, and it was an opening scene that made you realize that Halloween was far from your regular run-of-the-mill horror picture.